Thanks for attending our latest OptiPort Best Practices web conference, Cracking the Code, Clinical and Compliance Implications of ICD-10. As you know, our industry is facing major changes this year with the changeover from ICD-9 to ICD-10 in October. As the first major change to the codes in over 30 years, this has the potential to affect all areas of your practice. OptiPort is about providing business growth strategies for eye care practices. Our mission is to help build better eye care practices. We're here to help you grow and better prepare for the changes facing our industry. As you know, we focus on growth strategies in the area of sales, marketing, training, ways to help you optimize managed vision care, leadership and management programs, and access to experts like on today's call, Dr. Ron Packus. And all of these business growth tools in our community are funded via our cost savings through our group purchasing programs. I'm going to be handing it over to Dr. Ron Packus here in just a moment to talk about the ICD-10 changeover, but I do want to cover a couple of quick logistics. First, we are going to get some great info and valuable tools from the web conference, but we also want this to be interactive. So if you have a question, you can type it in the question box on the right-hand side of your screen, and we will do our best to have Dr. Ron Packus answer this either during the call or during the Q&A session at the end of the call. Second, if you're experiencing any technical difficulties during the presentation, please feel free to let us know via the question box as well. And we'll get somebody here on our OptiPort team to assist you. And finally, you will be hearing from myself and a few others here on the OptiPort team, especially Aaron Meyer, our marketing coordinator, who will be managing our Q&A question box. And now to our guest and friend of OptiPort, Dr. John Rompakis. And next slide, Dr. Rompakis, as you're driving us today. So Dr. Rompakis recently presented at our annual Spark conference at Vision Expo East, and his presentation was one of the most well-received sessions of the whole day. For those of you who are not at our Spark conference, Dr. Rompakis is the president and CEO of Practice Resource Management, a consulting firm for eye care professionals. His medical coding expertise and experience is robust. He currently serves as the chief medical coding editor for both Review of Optometry and Optometric Management, so you may have seen some of his work in those publications. He also works as a medical coding consultant and has developed medical and eye care coding software to help practices with their billing. Next slide, please. And also, make sure you save the date for OptiPort's Managing Managed Care Workshop this summer in Chicago. This year's workshop will feature a half-day presentation on clinical case management and medical record compliance across an organization by our good friend, Dr. Rompakis. So with all the changes this year, this workshop is a must-not-miss opportunity for your insurance billers, administrators, practice owners to get up to speed and improve your managing of managed care. Click the link in the chat box to register your team today. So I know you've heard enough of my voice today, so now over to our special guest and keynote speaker, Dr. Rompakis. It's all yours.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you. I guess it's good afternoon where everybody's at. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and thank you to OptiPort and Jim and his entire team to allow me to be able to present, I guess, what is really going to affect all stakeholders in the healthcare space. You know, it's been talked about for years. The ICD-10 was originally supposed to go into place in 2011, and here we are, 2015, and finally getting it implemented. And you know, it will affect everybody. And so for all of you on the call, whether you're an owner, a manager, a biller, doctor, it's going to affect all stakeholders, and it's going to be something of particular importance to do things right. How we have these webinars structured is it's going to actually be 3 parts, and we're going to be today talking about the fundamentals of why this is an important change to the U.S. healthcare system, what are the implications to your businesses, and why is this such an issue because of the exposure that it creates. OptiPort is all about growing your businesses in many different ways, whether it's through education or value-based programs or better pricing. But you know, one of the things that's also really important is we all work very, very hard to bring a lot of revenues into our practice. What these webinars are about are making sure that you get to keep the money that you bring into your practices, because the exposure and the audit environment that we're in today is fairly extreme. And it's one of those things that I think as we delve into things, you'll start to understand a little bit more why this change is so tumultuous and why it can really turn a business upside down. Now, the nice aspect of it is that virtually every negative event can be offset through good preventive practices and being proactive in what you're doing, both from the clinical level and in the billing level, which then obviously trickles up to the business owner themselves, who has ultimate culpability as being the owner or the one that's receiving most of the reimbursements in our third-party system. Again, I do primarily consulting in the space, and as was mentioned earlier, I do have a lot of different products in the eye care space that I do sell and things like that. Most important to realize, I guess, is that I've really been doing this for about 31 years now, and I do provide consulting services to just about every company that's out there. In fact, most of the newer equipment that you may have in your practices, whether it's a fundus camera or a visual fields unit or an OCT, probably has my fingerprint on it somewhere along the line on helping to get a code established for that or some sort of reimbursement strategy. I also serve as a the medical management teams for a couple of different insurance carriers. So I do see things from both sides. I do see things from the practitioner side, and I do see things from the carrier side as far as how they evaluate physicians when they start to look at patterns of billing, what are audit exposures, and how are punishments actually delivered. And I also do audit defense as well, which is a nice adjunct to everything. So let's kind of just dive right in. When we talk about fees today, understand that they're going to be the 2015 national average for Medicare maximum allowable reimbursements as of today. Remember that every policy I talk about will be accurate as of today. Since we have a wide, varied audience, remember that if we talk about any clinical cases or if you have questions specific to where you practice, you are responsible for following your own rules in your own geographic jurisdiction. And when we get into our coding examples, which will obviously increase as we go into parts 2 and parts 3 on this, these are coding examples only, right? We never follow a pattern of care, or we never follow the same exact care paradigm for any 2 patients. Every patient's care is provided as an individual, and I'll get into that more later as we go through the presentation. So what are we really trying to think about today? Well, we want to learn the genesis of the ICD-10 system. Where did it start? How long has it been around? What's the rationale and format? What's the practical application? What are our exposures that we have within our businesses themselves? We want to talk about the clinical conventions of things, the clinical hierarchies, and then being able to ultimately say, hey, look, we've got until October 1, right? So let's think about it. We've got June, July, August, and September, 4 months to prepare. CMS, when they originally introduced the ICD-10 system back in 2010 to be implemented in 2011, predicted that it would take about 24 months for the average office to implement all of the procedures for the ICD-10 within the system at an average cost for a 3-doctor practice of about $84,000 per practice. Now realize that that cost itself was based upon software upgrades, staff training, time cost of money while you're waiting for your receivables, working with different stakeholders, carriers, patients, other third-party carriers as well outside of Medicare to be able to really get your practice up to speed. We're going to try to fast-track that as we are thinking about how you're going to apply these things into your practice, so that way you can say, okay, over the next 4 months, how am I really going to be able to make this happen at an effective level? And again, there's going to be different areas of responsibility based upon each and every stakeholder within the business themselves. So again, major thing that I want you to understand here as we get into things, the ICD-10 is not just a billing tool. Let's talk about really what the ICD, the International Classification of Disease System, is really about. In the United States, we primarily use, we think of things in our businesses as how do I bill and get reimbursed for a particular service or procedure or special ophthalmic test that the doctor did. Well, you know, the United States is really the last bastion on earth of capitalistic medicine. In most other areas of the country or the world, you know, it's socialized medicine or government-sponsored medicine for the most part. The ICD system is a worldwide system that allows a disease state to be classified exactly the same no matter where the patient is. So if I'm in Zimbabwe or Paris or London, New York or St. Louis, it really doesn't matter, because when I diagnose somebody with a specific diagnosis, that diagnosis has the same meaning around the world no matter where it's at. And we have to also understand that when we're working with a diagnosis and when we start to think about the Affordable Care Act and where healthcare is moving in the United States, we have to be extremely precise and extremely accurate with the diagnosis that we're going to be placing in somebody, an individual patient's health record. Because as we move to a unified health record in the United States, meaning that I'm a patient, I walk into one of your member locations, I get an eye exam, I get a visual field done, and somebody says, oh, you're a glaucoma suspect, because I just heard that that was a good code to use so that way I could get reimbursed for the visual field. Well, guess what? That health record that you're using in your practice is going to be the same health record that's visible to their internist, the same health record that's going to be visible to their cardiologist, to their allergist, to whomever it may be. And so accuracy and truthfulness of that diagnosis is extremely important, because that will affect somebody's premium structure down the road. That'll affect it's not going to affect their ability to get insurance, because remember, one of the major tenets of the Affordable Care Act was to provide universal coverage for any individual, irrespective of pre-existing conditions. But it will affect premium structure, and as we know, that's a rapidly changing environment today. So let's kind of talk about things. You know, when we start to think about what you're doing in your practice, the very first thing I'm going to talk about resources. I mean, if you don't have the current rule books, and I say, you know, what are the rule books? The rule books are the CPT book produced by the American Medical Association, both an ICD-9 book for 2015 and the 2016 ICD-10 book. Now, you can buy the 2015 ICD-10 book already and have that, and then just come this fall, actually it'll be available in August, you'll be able to buy the 2016 ICD-10 book. These are must-haves. They're not, hey, let's think about it, or maybe we'll get it, or maybe not, or gosh, you know, whatever. These are the rule books. And why do I say rule books? Well, it's not just a resource that you look up a code in. It's not just a resource that you say, oh, I have to find out what is the code for myopia in the ICD-10. That's easy. You can use automated tools like mine, CodeSafe Plus, if you'd like, to be able to look up a code or convert a code. Converting the code is going to be the easiest thing in the world. That's not where our difficulty lies. That's not where your challenges are going to be. The biggest changes that you're going to have are how do you keep your medical record, and how does that medical record need to be compliant in the new system. And the rule books, the CPT and the ICD, are what stipulates the rules. Now realize this, if you're a health care provider, so docs, I'm speaking to you on the call. If you're a licensed healthcare provider, you are obligated by law to follow the rules of the ICD-9 and the ICD-10 and the CPT. What law governs that? HIPAA, which passed in 1996, the Health and Information Patient Portability Act. That's what governed your use and your mandatory following of the rules, all right? So as good as my resource is, CodeSafe Plus, we will translate an ICD-9 to an ICD-10 faster than you can blink your eyes. Easy as that. So that's not where the issue is. The issue is that we can't, as a third party, publish every single rule and regulation contained within the ICD system or the CPT because of copyright rules that they have. So I am going to give you some resources, right, so that way you have these. And also I should mention, and I know that Aaron can reinforce this as well, but the handouts for these will be available on your member-only portal, so that way you can download these presentations and have permanent copies for yourselves and for future reference as well. So our system is changing, right? I mean, we're certainly moving to a cost structure where the benefit is borne by the recipient. I mean, we've all seen in practices where the average deductible now is skyrocketing. The foundation of the Affordable Care Act, just to make sure that everybody is clear on this, was to reduce costs. And how are they going to reduce costs? They were going to reduce costs by reducing utilization. How were they going to reduce utilization? They were going to make the people that needed the care pay for the care. And that was one of the primary structures of this. So the average deductible today in the United States is roughly $6,900 before somebody's medical insurance actually kicks in to help provide coverage. So most people have coverage. It's just that their covered services aren't actually, the carrier doesn't participate in the cost of those covered services until that individual has met their deductible. So it's a changing system out there, and we have to be aware of it. And you know, there's a lot of different information out there. So one of the things I will promise to you is that everything today is going to be a reference piece of information. I'm not big on my opinion or other people's opinions because that really doesn't help you. The most important thing in the world is that you have good transparency on everything and be able to know where you can look things up in the future as well. So let's talk about some basic relationships. Now, if you're the biller or the business owner, understand that you have culpability as well in this system, because oftentimes if you have a doctor that's working for you, you're the one that's accepting assignment on their behalf for the payment for their services. Therefore, you now have a stake in the game. You have an NPI, a National Provider Identifier number, that obligates you to follow all of these same rules as well. And there's a lot of rules and regulations that governs that. So we know that the U.S. False Claims Act, which is one of the basic pillars of the Social Security Act under which Medicare is governed, and if it's a Medicare rule, it generally promulgates through the rest of the healthcare system and follows into your other provider agreements with your other third-party carriers, whether they be managed vision care plans or medical insurance providers as well. We have to maintain ethical behavior, and there are specific rules that are surrounded by our relationships with the payers, relationships with fellow providers, and relationships with our vendors. We also understand that our relationship with patients is generally dominated by a third party. So the care that I can provide, the policies that I have to do, how I have to describe the patient encounter, what I have to write down in the medical record, procedures that I'm allowed to do, are governed by this provider agreement, right? And that's really a contractual arrangement that a business owner or a physician has with that third-party payer, whether it's the federal government, the state governments under Medicaid programs, or other third-party payers. We all have to follow these rules. The basic components that are pertinent to our conversation are we are obligated to code and bill accurately. We're actually obligated to complete or have a complete and thorough medical record, and we'll talk about what that means here in just a little bit. We also are granted prescription authority within our framework of our scope of license, so depending on the state that you're in, you'll know that you'll have a different prescriptive authority. And then this also allows us to accept assignment or get paid on behalf of a patient for our services that we're providing. Because remember, the patient really is the one that has the benefit. We have to accept assignment, meaning that we will accept what they are willing to pay us, and the patient signs that right over to us in doing that. So Some of the major things that are really going to be an issue with the ICD-10, more so than the ICD-9, is that since the ICD-10 system is so much more specific, understand that being able to define medically necessary care and the services that we were actually performed and having those tied together with a very specific ICD-10 code is going to be critical for you to be able to get not only reimbursed for the services, but if we don't do it correctly, it's going to start to send up red flags to the carriers, which means that we may be exposing ourselves unnecessarily to audit. So carriers pay a lot of attention to services that are provided that have no benefit to the patient or beneficial outcome to that particular patient's clinical condition. Services that are provided by improperly trained or improperly supervised care, or services that have been provided by a provider that have been excluded from the Medicare program. So again, there's very specific things that we have to follow. Now the OIG, which is the Office of Inspector General, they're really the police force for Medicare and the Social Security Act and are directly responsible to report to Congress how this system is working. They are very serious and have many publications about what they consider to be worthless claims, worthless services. That means patient services that have provided no real diagnostic or therapeutic benefit to the patient. All right? These offenses carry criminal penalties that go along with them. So these are not small little things, all right? If we submit a claim that contains inaccurate information, and I want you to all visualize the CMS 1500 form or the electronic equivalent of that that you use when you're reporting a procedure and a diagnosis. Each form has the ability for you to report 6 different line items of service. Each of those line items is finable up to $10,000 per line, plus triple damages, which is awarded to the federal government. So what is considered to be a worthless service? Well, Medicare defines a worthless service as something that is not accepted and safe and effective by the medical community. A procedure that is not supported by peer-reviewed medical literature. Not something that is experimental or investigational. The 4th bullet point is the most important, and so is the 5th. That is not medically necessary in a specific case or for a specific medical diagnosis, or services or procedures that are furnished at a level, duration, dosage, or frequency not appropriate for a specific patient or clinical condition. So for example, if you were going to see a patient and you said, you know, I need you to come back in 3 days, 5 days, 7 days in a week, and you were following that patient up in 4 office visits over the course of a week for a particular condition. And if that was at a duration or frequency that was excessive, then you would have culpability. And you'd say, well, how in the heck do they know that? Well, what they do know now with the ICD-10 is going to be in place is that diagnosis is going to be so specific, they're going to have metrics that they're going to be able to look at and say, for this very specific condition, what is the typical frequency of office visit for follow-up? And we'll be able to see that because there's specific diagnosis codes now that we're going to use for actively managed condition, following managed, a follow-up of a condition, and then sequela secondary to a condition. So the diagnoses are going to be specifically tied to the office visit that's going to allow them to be able to do analysis like they've never been able to do before. So this is why it's really important for us to pay attention to how we apply the ICD-10s. Also, your relationship says that the medical record has to be perfect. Well, let me just say it maybe in the most simplistic form possible. The ICD-10 is not going to be difficult because of converting a code. Converting the code from an ICD-9 to an ICD-10, as I said earlier, is going to be the easiest part of the entire process. The hardest part of the process is going to be that the physician needs to create a medical record now that is much more specific than they've ever had to create in the past. That means more time taken with the patient or with the pretester or somebody who's creating the intake form. No more can I just write, eye pain on a line, or why are you here today? I've got blurred vision. I need to now say blurred vision, right eye, when does it happen, where did it happen, how did it happen? All of these other different types of descriptors that go along with that particular symptom, because my reason for visit has to now match up with the clinical testing that I'm providing, which now has to match up with the very specific diagnosis that I'm providing to the carrier overall. Now, for those of you who say, you know what, doesn't really apply to me. I just do managed vision care plans, and I don't belong to any medical carriers at all. I just, provide services, and I give the patient a walkout statement. Doesn't matter. You still have the same obligations under law to do it exactly the same, whether or not you are a par provider for a medical carrier. So you can't really escape the confines of what the ICD-10 is going to be bringing up. So again, remember that your contract, your provider agreement, the doctors, by your signature on that claim form, whether it's electronic, whether it's manual, whether somebody is red stamping it for you, rubber stamping it for you, or whether it just is getting submitted, remember, you are attesting under the penalties of perjury that that medical record is accurate, complete, and every procedure on there, we could go into your medical record and there would be justification of medical necessity in your medical record. Just to make sure you understand, when you're submitting that CMS 1500 form, here's what it basically says. In submitting this claim for payment, again, I'm using Medicare as my reference here, from federal funds, I'm certifying that the information on this form is true, accurate, and complete. I, as the physician, have familiarized myself with all laws, regulations, and program instructions from the contractor. I have provided or can provide sufficient information required to allow the government to make an informed eligibility and payment decision. That means, doc, if you are requested to provide a record, that record will contain everything that they need to see that what you billed was appropriate, medically necessary, and accurate to that patient's condition. And the bottom line says this claim complies with all Medicare program instructions. So for those of you who don't know the coding rules or regs, or you said, gosh, I've never really needed to pay attention to them because I just do a comprehensive exam and a refraction, that's all I really do. Hey, you're not, you still have culpability to know all of those rules and regs behind there. And the icing on the cake is this also says that my signature is to certify that the foregoing information is true and accurate. I understand that any false claims or statements or concealment of material fact may be prosecuted under applicable federal and Stark laws. So that means every service that you provide every single day, every examination, every patient encounter, you are certifying that that medical record is true, accurate, and complete, and everything that you have billed for is accurate, true, and complete. So again, compliance, thoroughness is really important. So why do I bring this up? Well, here's the exposure. So for the stakeholders that are the billers and the owners, you also have culpability. Because if you're signing off on this claim or you're processing the claim, or if you know that something's wrong and you're not correcting the doctor and correcting it to be true and accurate, now we come into one of two categories, waste and abuse and fraud. So abuse is considered when healthcare providers or suppliers do not follow good medical practices. That means local standard of care that results in unnecessary costs, improper payments, or services that are not medically necessary. Fraud is when someone is intentionally falsifying information or deceiving the insurance carrier. Now, you'd say, well, wait a second, that really can't happen. Now, we see this all the time, waste and abuse. You know, I'll tell you, I'll be real honest, I can go into just about any practice in the United States, eye care practice, non-eye care practice, it really doesn't matter, and I could find fault in about 12 to 18% of all claims submitted. Trust me, nobody's perfect out there, all right? But what we want people to do is we want people to strive for perfection. We want people to always be having processes of self-improvement within their enterprise or their organization, so that way they can correct these things. So doctors, as an example, let's say you are continuing to say to your billers, I did this test and this test because the patient was a glaucoma suspect. Well, you know what? Glaucoma suspect has not been a valid diagnosis, right, since 2011. That was the last time it was used. Glaucoma suspect changed in 2012 to be a much more specific diagnosis. So now you have to tell us what kind of glaucoma suspect the patient actually is. So if the patient is a borderline open angle glaucoma, low risk patient, then you have to use that specific diagnosis, and the tests that you're doing with that have to be very specific. So if you continue just to use a non-specific or unspecified type of a code, and your biller comes back to you and says, hey doc, I need you to really be better about this, you need to be more specific about what diagnosis to use. And doctor, if you don't change your behavior based upon that, now you are intentionally doing something incorrect, and that could be perceived as moving into the fraudulent category. So again, remember that making an honest mistake is okay. Doesn't mean that you're scot-free, but it does mean that it's an honest mistake. When you fail to correct that mistake, it changes the complexion of the situation completely. Because the only difference between fraud and abuse is actually your intent as you're moving through things. They're being much more aggressive on what they're doing as far as pursuing people. And this, again, this environment moving to the ICD-10 is going to allow the carriers to have much more information to be able to pick you out, see that you're an outlier, find aberrant billing patterns. So that's where the biggest exposure is. It's not the conversion of the code again. Please, you guys got it. We all have to understand converting that code is going to be a piece of cake. It's the medical record that's really going to be at the center of the ICD-10 platform that we have to pay attention to. And trust me, this is a big deal. To the federal government, it's about $5.5 billion a year coming in from fraud and abuse recoveries. And listen, I belong to different organizations like the American Academy of Professional Coders. They brag about it. President Obama created a public-private partnership because they didn't have enough federal auditors to go into practices and take a look at what's going on. And these penalties are not inconsequential. I mean, here's an OD in South Dakota, $363,000 that they had to pay in restitution to Medicare and Medicaid for fraudulent types of services. And in 2013, Medicare turned every 65-year-old and older into the eyes and ears of Medicare, called the Medicare Senior Patrol. And the Medicare Senior Patrol is individuals who are financially incentivized to turn their doctors in. And what would cause somebody to want to turn their doctor or their hospital in for fraudulent behavior or suspected fraudulent behavior would be, I don't understand a bill that I got. That's the number one trigger. Nobody ever spent time to tell me, why do I get this bill and it's got all of these different tests? Or if I've got things that I've got one price for one thing and I'm charging somebody without insurance one price and charging somebody with insurance another price. Our industry is rife with those problems. I mean, people who are doing, cash pay discounts and different types of things like that on professional services, or have two different fee schedules for, private pay versus insured patients, they're just, you have a lot of exposure, both as a business owner and as a physician in that situation. So again, these things are significant issues. And it's not just Medicare, believe it or not. Let me just show you a typical thing here. This is from VSP, obviously. And so with VSP, I mean, here's a particular type of a restitution letter. This is something that I get every single day that I help doctors with. And it says, "Dear doctor, we looked at your records. You owe us $93,000. Here's what you did. You failed to establish medical necessity for some of the clinical findings that you did not describe the clinical findings when you did fundus photography. You listed vitreous opacities as a diagnosis, but the patient history and chief complaint didn't have any information that supported that. You left out an interpretation report 5 times, and you inserted punctal plugs, but you didn't follow standard medical protocol for that. In addition, please send us an additional $7,000 because we're charging you to do the audit, and so just write us a check for $100,000. This is pretty standard stuff. This is nothing unusual for a given carrier. So this is something you really have to understand. It's a big deal, and it happens with managed vision care plans, whether it's iMed or Spectera or VSP or Medicare or Blue Cross. Everybody is out there looking now for these particular types of things. And the ICD-10 is going to create many more opportunities for carriers if we don't get this right. So what's a red flag that would trigger something like this? Using procedure or diagnosis codes under review by the Office of Inspector General. Doctors and billers, please make sure you're reviewing your submitted claims against known audit issues. So doctors, if you're not proofing your claims, at least doing a spot check of 5 to 10 claims a month, please start to ask for those back and say, I'd like to make sure I'm double checking what I'm signing my name to. Billers, we have to make sure that you also have a self-audit type of a program in your practice as well, because the ICD-10 is going to require that there's much more precision, many more things can slip through the cracks. Can abuse codes, if we have aberrant or inconsistent billing patterns, if we're trying to maximize revenue on procedures without sufficient medical documentation. Cloning documentation is a big deal. Not understanding definitions and inappropriate use of modifiers. That's another big key thing that we're going to be running into. So, bottom line is how you create your medical record really does matter. Now, they are forecasting, and this is based upon what has happened in every other country that's adopted the ICD-10. They are forecasting about a 20% reduction in productivity. Why? Because the physician is going to have to spend more time with the patient. The physician is going to have to be able to ask many more in-depth questions to ensure that the chief complaint and the statement of medical necessity are going to match the clinical testing that's actually provided. In addition, we now have to match the diagnosis specifically to each one of those other components. And so where the ICD-10 has been implemented, which is, just to give you an idea, and we're going to cover this more in depth in part 2, but the UK has been using ICD-10 for 20 years. The United States and Italy are the only 2 industrialized countries that aren't currently using the ICD-10. Everybody else has had it for a long time. In fact, most of the world is moving to the ICD-11s in 2017. That should give you a perspective of just how far behind the United States is in reporting our morbidity and mortality data to the World Health Organization that actually monitors and runs the ICD system overall. So you want to be able to have good things to be able to use in your practice. So let's talk about what's really, really important. So when you're providing clinical care, when you're providing clinical care, and I know that if a patient presents with a particular sign or symptom of an eye disease or injury, the thing that's most important when you're looking from the clinical perspective is that you're providing a level of care that is based upon evidence-based medicine. That's whether you're providing a comprehensive exam for a managed vision care plan, or whether you're providing just a 99,000 code or an intermediate office visit under the ophthalmic codes to a medical patient, right? We have to make sure that your clinical care is based upon solid evidence-based medicine. In the role of ICD-9 and ICD-10 compliance, it's also based on the process of what we call medical necessity. In other words, what does this patient need as compared to what do you want to do? You just don't have free reign with somebody else's checkbook, right? If a third party is paying for something, that doesn't mean that your obligation to do things is gone. You actually have more strict requirements that you have to do. Remember, by law, when you took your state license and you got licensed in your individual state of practice, you are also legally obligated to be the patient's fiduciary. And that means that you're obligated to act in their best interest from a medical perspective. So medical care and patient care always comes first. That doesn't mean you're doing something in their financial best interest, but from a medical perspective. So let's look at what the definition of medical necessity is. So here's the definition straight from the Medicare.gov website. Now, here would be a homework assignment for everybody. Since I don't know where everybody is sprinkled around the country, I would encourage you, and for those of the billing staff that are out there, I would encourage you to go to your contracted carriers, whether it's VSP, IMED, Spectera, Davis, you name it, Blue Cross, Aetna, Cigna, your Medicare carrier, whoever it may be, and your contracted medical carriers, Google or find their specific definition of medical necessity. My guess is that it's not going to be too different than this one because all of them adopt basically the same definition. So medical necessity is defined as services or supplies that are proper and needed. Now, needed is a word that loses its translation sometime in clinical practice. We might substitute convenient for that. Doesn't mean that we're doing that correctly. We have to demonstrate that something is necessary to do in order to diagnose or treat the patient's medical condition. Services or supplies that are provided for the diagnostic area. So if you are providing some don't have actual necessity working with, right, and you'll say, well, I have pretty basic care that I do. Well, I'll give you an example. Patient comes in today for just a general comprehensive eye exam under VSP. And you tell that patient to come back in 1 year. Why was that duration of time appropriate or medically necessary for that patient? Have to tell the record why it was important or necessary that you had to do a comprehensive eye exam. Why was it necessary to do that level of service rather than an intermediate exam or a routine eye exam using the S code? So again, just because you're working in a managed vision care environment instead of a medical carrier doesn't mean that you escape the burden of this definition. So again, let's think about this. The medical record must clearly demonstrate that the service, procedure, or test that you either ordered or performed was absolutely necessary for you to do in order to diagnose a condition, follow the diagnosis of a condition, treat a condition, or follow the treatment of a patient's condition. That's the burden that you have to establish in your medical record. Does that mean you're going to have to write more? Absolutely. Go back again to the 20% reduction in productivity. The reason why is because you're going to have more interaction. So if I tell a patient that I need to see you back in 1 week because I prescribed a medication for their allergies or I prescribed an antibiotic for their blepharitis or conjunctivitis, I now have to be able to say, return in 1 week for a specific reason. Patient to RTC Q1, 1 week or PRN, secondary to new pharmaceutical therapy instituted today. So you now have to tell the record what you're doing and why you're doing it. That's going to be absolutely critical because when that diagnosis is going to be tied now to your plan, which is tied to your medical record, which is tied back to the chief complaint, all of those things are going to be touch points for computer analysis when they're looking at the claims that you're submitting with the frequency and diagnoses that you're submitting overall. So remember, using the CPT system, using the ICD system, it's a legal requirement, so you have to learn how to do it properly. Make sure that the patient's care always comes first, right? The medical record now comes second. So let's think about this. I never would really need to worry about coding, right? I don't need to worry about what code to use. I shouldn't focus on that at all. The patient tells me everything that I need to do by their complaint and what I discovered during the course of their exam. So if I'm only providing medically necessary care to the patient, then that would be the standard of care in my local area for that patient presentation. If I'm recording accurately the care that I provided to the patient, then I coded both into CPT and ICD language the exact procedure that I did, the definition that I met, and the diagnosis of exactly what's wrong with that patient. And I will just tell you this, an unspecified code in the ICD-10 system is going to be frowned upon. Those will be targeted codes, right? Because the ICD-10 is so specific that the frequency of you using an unspecified code is going to be extremely rare. So again, we have to make sure that everything ties together. Medical necessity also is, to the level of service that we talked about. Here's a reference from the Medicare publication. Medical necessity of a service is the overarching criteria for payment in addition to the individual requirements of the CPT code. That means PS. Doctors, billers, you have to know what that definition of that is. And if the record, what it contains, doesn't match that definition, then you can't use that code to represent that that's what you did. It would not be medically necessary or appropriate to bill a higher level of E&M service when a lower level of service is unwarranted. Billers, remember that 92,000 codes come under the broad category of E&M services when they're considering it in the rules. The volume of documentation should not be the primary influence upon which a specific level of service is billed. Documentation should support the level of service reported, okay? So again, very specific on what we're supposed to do. Carriers track this stuff all the time. Here's an example from National Government Services, which is one of the Medicare administrative carriers or contractors in the country, looking at 99,000 codes. And so they can see that there's a failure rate fairly high of 99215s, 99214s, almost, let's just say, approximately 70% failure rate for individuals to meet the requirements of the 99,000 codes appropriately. And I can also share with you the Office of Inspector General is looking at the overutilization of the 92,000 comprehensive codes because a comprehensive examination is really not required every single year. Even the Academy of Ophthalmology and their preferred practice patterns stipulate a comprehensive exam is only necessary once every 3 to 5 years, and a routine exam is good in between there, and the AOA says a comprehensive exam once every 24 months. Why does the healthcare systems care about this? Because it's a lot of money, right? There's a lot of errors in coding. People are overcoding. They're doing services that are inappropriate or unnecessary to do, and it's costing the healthcare system and the taxpayers, you and I, it's costing us a lot of money at the same time. So again, remember that the ICD and all of this stuff really ties together. So you can use systems like mine, right, that provide you with real-time information, and I'd be happy to talk to anybody about that offline, about how our services help you guys, but it's important to understand you have to have rules and you have to have easy access to things. So let's go ahead and talk about carriers and what they do. They generally follow what's called a local coverage determination, and that's generally what establishes the policies in place in your specific zip code. So carriers will establish it, typically Medicare does, and then they tell you what needs to be done for a particular condition with the appropriate frequency, dosage, duration, etc. So if I had somebody that was a glaucoma suspect, again, we'll go back to, borderline open-angle glaucoma, low risk. They may say that that patient, is entitled to 2 OCTs per year, 1 visual field and 1 photograph. Or your carrier may say, they're entitled to 1 OCT, 1 visual field, and 1 photograph, that type of a thing. So again, local rules are very important to know. Sometimes carriers don't have a policy. Therefore, doctors, you are obligated to know the rules of medical necessity in your local area. You're obligated to know the appropriate diagnoses and utilization guidelines and the CPT definitions of every procedure that you're representing that you're doing. You have to make sure that you're doing it in accordance with that. Very rarely we'll have a patient who wants a service that is a non-covered service. That doesn't mean one that is susceptible to their deductible. It means a non-covered service. If that's the case, then you're welcome to do that, and you charge the patient your usual and customary rate overall. So let's talk about some differences between medical and refractive plans. Remember, under a refractive plan, it's a predetermined benefit, all right? So for example, under VSP, a patient doesn't require a comprehensive exam. A comprehensive exam is actually just one level of service that they're covered for. So if a patient comes in with their VSP form, VSP says, doctor, the patient is entitled to a 92004, 92014, 92002, 92012, S0620, and S0621. VSP actually allows you to choose the medically necessary or medically appropriate level of service for that particular patient. You cannot assume that a comprehensive exam is automatically necessary, okay? Because they may in the future be looking at somebody who is a simple myope and going, why did they get a comprehensive examination? They may say, doctor, we need to do a lower level of service unless there was reason for you to do a comprehensive exam. Obviously, the patient should have a policy in force and be eligible for coverage. If a patient truly has duplicative coverage, let's say they are entitled to a comprehensive exam under their medical insurance and a comprehensive exam under VSP. Just as an example, it's the patient's choice. They get to choose which of their contracted benefits they want to use. Not which one pays you more money, but which one do they want to use, and they can very well make their decision on, gosh, I have to pay only a $10 copay instead of a $150 bill out of pocket that goes to my deductible. Billers, if your doctors are telling you to bill something medical because they found something during a general examination, we need to stop that behavior. And you'll see why here in just a second as we finish up with our definitions of what is medical and what is not. So it's not what you find during the course of the examination that makes something billable to a medical carrier. It's actually the purpose of the examination. Because the very first thing, in order for any medical insurance company to participate or for that policy to be able to kick in, has to be a chief complaint. I want you to think about it this way. If a tree falls on my car and I have a $1,000 deductible on my auto policy, but only a $500 deductible on my homeowner's policy, they're going to say, John, we're really sorry. We can't use your homeowner's policy. That is non-covered underneath that. Just like the same thing between their refractive insurance and their medical insurance, all right? If they say, hey, I'm trying to bill medical because I found something during the course of the examination, the medical carrier is going to say, doctor, we don't cover that in this particular situation. Either the patient paid for it or the patient's managed vision care paid for that other encounter, but not us, because we didn't have coverage that was in force. So let's look at this, right? Because patients are not expected to be the expert. They don't know, hey, use my medical, hey, use my vision. We have to be the experts in helping them understand their benefits. So I want you to think about this. There's only 3 ways right, that a medical carrier is going to be able to be engaged. They initiate the appointment by calling up and saying, my eye, I have a broken eye. My eye hurts, it's red, it's yellow, it's green, I've got discharge, I've got flashes, I've got floaters, I've got headaches, I've got something going on. Number 2, you tell the patient, I need to see you in 3 weeks to follow up on the new glaucoma medication I prescribed to you. I need to see you in 1 week. I need to see you in 6 months for this specific reason. Or you get a referral from another physician that says, I need you to examine Mrs. Smith because she was just recently diagnosed with diabetes and I want you to evaluate her for diabetic retinopathy. Those are the only 3 ways that somebody can come into your practice and fulfill the chief complaint requirement. So again, it's either physician directed by stipulating the reason for the return visit, or it's initiated by the patient. So let's look at the definition that comes directly from Medicare. In order for Medicare, as a medical carrier, to be responsible for the coverage of services rendered by the physician is dependent upon the purpose of the examination rather than on the ultimate diagnosis of the patient's condition. When a patient goes to a physician with a complaint or symptoms of an eye disease or injury, then the doctor's services are covered, even if the fact that only eyeglasses were prescribed. However, and this is the kicker, right? When a beneficiary, a patient, goes into his or her physician for an eye examination and has no specific complaint, the expenses for that examination are not covered, even though as a result of that examination, the doctor discovered a pathologic condition. So, if you're having a patient come back in 1 year to evaluate them for cataracts, you sure as heck better tell me why the patient's coming back and what their reason is for coming back at that frequency and what eye are you examining and what specific type of cataract do they have. Because all of those things in the ICD-10 system now are going to be closely intertwined with each other. So again, we really have to pay attention to that so that way we can make sure we're doing things correctly. So,
Dr. Rampakis, we had a question come up on this subject on the chief complaint.
Yes.
So does an annual eye exam recall, say a postcard or whatnot, just a reminder of your annual eye exam, how does that relate to the chief complaint, being is it patient-initiated, physician-initiated, et cetera?
Right, so a recall, so you can send a reminder to a patient that they have an appointment. That's really what a recall notice is. We're just reminding you that you have an appointment that we set at some point in time in the past, right? The purpose of that visit is actually contained in the medical record. So what was the reason? Do you mind asking the individual who asked you the question, what was the reason for that patient coming back?
I think they're referring to just a routine annual eye exam reminder. So some people do it a year out or 2 years out, time to come back in and see us and get your eyes checked out.
So if that's under the auspices of a managed vision care plan, then remember that that is a prepaid benefit and that patient is entitled to their examination. Remember that that would always be used just with a refractive diagnosis and then whatever level of service was appropriate for that individual patient on that individual encounter. So I don't really have any issues or problems with that. But if you're recalling a patient for a medical purpose, so you're seeing somebody who's 63 years old and you're having them back for a cataract evaluation or something like that, now that you have to be very specific on why you're having that patient back, what eye are you examining, the level of eye examination has to be commensurate with that particular purpose. And this should also I've got this statement highlighted, so if anybody other than the doctor is doing the intake or writing down the chief complaint, please look here when we start talking about things like, if I start thinking about complaints or symptoms of an eye disease or injury, those things are particularly important to make sure that you're noting. So what type of complaint, what are their symptoms, which eye, where did the injury take place, how did it take place. All of those things are going to be critically important, because while the ICD-9 system does not have that level of detail, the ICD-10 system does have that level of detail, and we're going to have to be very specific when we talk about that. Any other questions at this point in time?
We did have a question come up a little off topic from where we are now. It's a little earlier in the presentation, but you mentioned that it's predicted that there will be a 20% reduction in productivity for the. We assume that's for doctors. How long do you think it would take them to catch up on that as they become more familiar with the new system, or will they ever be able to gain that lost productivity back?
I'd like to that's a great question, Erin, and thank you to whoever asked that. I would like to tell you that I think that if you do things right starting today, you can offset that 20% drop in productivity by starting to put things into practice ahead of time. So if we know that the primary reduction in productivity is going to have to take place by the doctors writing more in the record, why would we want to wait until the date of October 1 to say, okay, guys, now be more specific? Let's start right now. Let's start putting things in place so now this is actually becoming just part of their normal habit and normal routine when they're doing things. Maybe start to examine your workflow and how you have a patient intake and what goes on and who writes things down, and start to examine areas where there's obstacles right now, or how you can actually start to put in some better practices today, so when October 1 does hit, now it's just normal. It's still good medical practice to do that today. The implementation of the ICD-10 is just going to mean that the carriers or anybody else who looks at that medical record has greater ability to correlate all of this data and find, expose your flaws, if you will, within that system. But if it was me, I'd start right now. I'd start right now looking at where can I pick up an extra 2 minutes in a patient encounter? Where can I pick up 30 seconds at the front desk? How can I get people to write things better? Can I create a new form that allows greater levels of detail that maybe can more effectively and efficiently capture that patient encounter? So I'd start right away, and maybe you can offset that 20%. Great.
We have a few more come through, so if you don't mind, we can just
I don't mind at all.
With those. So what about an asymptomatic patient that presents for a routine exam but is found to have a retinal tear or raging glaucoma?
Right.
So
both of those situations would not be billable to an insurance carrier, not to a medical carrier. That patient would have to pay for that first visit out of pocket, or if they came in under the coverage of a managed vision care plan, then the managed vision care plan would cover that visit. But that initial visit, if the patient does not have complaints or symptoms of an eye disease or injury, right, then that's non-covered.
All right. Next up, is there a list of specific questions that should be asked prior to eye exam or during the doctor visit other than what we ask now? Is there a specific form available?
That's a hard question for me to answer because I don't know what you're asking now. So when a patient comes in, obviously one of the things that you always want to do on every single patient is do an ocular review of systems. That's basically a litany of questions that say, are you having problems with, blur, itching, burning, tearing, redness, pain, flashes, floaters, headaches, double vision, all of those types of questions. But now we want to make it specific to right eye, left eye, or both eyes to ensure that those things are, being asked appropriately. So if somebody, obviously you guys have my email address within the presentation, and Erin, I know that you can, that you'll have that on the website as well. But if you guys want to email me the list of questions you currently are asking, I'd be happy to evaluate it and make some appropriate suggestions for you.
let's do a follow-up.
Yeah, that'd be great. And actually, we could, if you don't mind, if you want to go through, we can do a follow-up FAQ. We can get the answers to these questions and send them out to all attendees today.
Sure. That would be fantastic. I mean, I know that we're recording this, and so it'll be up on your website, but however we'd like to follow up with individuals, that would be wonderful.
Okay, great. Well, that's all we have for now. So if we didn't get to your question, we'll have Dr. Rumpakis answer that, and we'll distribute those out to you, as well as directions on how to get the presentation from today in the recording.
Yeah. Let me just finish up with my one last slide, and then I'm going to turn it back over to you guys to make some closing comments. So our next webinar is going to be scheduled for August 13th. I'd love to see, obviously, everybody who's supposed to attend the meeting in July be there. Love to meet you and answer your questions in person. But in August 13th, we're going to dive into the ICD-9, how it differs from the ICD-10, the actual structure of the ICD-10, and we'll tie it back into the medical necessity, the chief complaint items that we talked about today. And then we're going to jump right into some typical anterior segment clinical cases. So things like myopia, hyperopia, astigmatism, presbyopia, ocular allergy, infection, injuries, those types of things. We'll actually take you into a clinical case and then show you how it's coded in the ICD-9 system and then coded in the ICD-10. So that way you can kind of get a visual contrast and understand how that code is going to be moved. And then we'll talk about what's supposed to be written in the medical record as well, so that way you can have kind of a model for your doctors and to follow, as well as your billers going on. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over. I'm sorry.
Who do you think the best audience for the next web conference is within the practice? Who's the best type attendee for that?
So I think at the next level, I think today was particularly important for the owners to hear as well, because certainly when we talk about exposure and liability, they have it just as well as the providers do. I think as we're going to get into, kind of start to deep dive into more of the nitty-gritty, I definitely think the billing teams need to be there, and the physicians would be the primary audiences for the next two webinars, so both the one in August and the one in September.
Great, thank you.
All right, and again, from OptiPort's perspective, we would like to thank Dr. Rumpakis for, again, the first of 3 webinars, as well as attending and presenting for a half a day at our managed care workshop, as you can see on your screen today. And we'd also like to thank Essilor for sponsoring our webinar today from Dr. Rumpakis. If you check your chat box, you will be able to click a link to register for that managed care workshop. And if you do have questions about gaining access to our member-only website, you can send an email to solutions@optiport.com, and Aaron can assist with that process within your practice. And next slide, Dr. Rumpakis. And in closing, just a reminder, OptiPort exists as a community of peers to help you grow, and obviously today is a great example of how some of the things that OptiPort does to help your practice. Again, we're 14 years old with over 31 of the best multi-office eye care practices across the country, and we are the largest and only group focused on running a multi-office eye care business. So we appreciate all of your time today, and again, Dr. Rumpakis, thank you very much for your time. We will be submitting those questions that you asked during the presentation to Dr. Rumpakis. We'll get his answers and then email all attendees with those responses. Aaron, do we have anything else to cover?
I think that's it from my perspective.
All right. Well, everybody, thank you very much. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll look forward to seeing you in Chicago or August 13th on our next ICD-10 web conference.
Thank you, everybody. Are you guys still there?